today we have a number of items on the program. I want to start with some theoretical material. We'll continue talking about trade, the topic we started talking about last week. And after that, I want you to work with some databases. And then at the end of the class, we have a presentation by La Liga Group. Exactly. That's you. Also, we looked at your assignments, the hand-ins, the first assignment hand-in, and about half of the class knew what to do and about half of the class didn't know what to do. So we're going to work with the database today, and then I want you to look again at your assignment and, if necessary, change it and resubmit. Because really some of you just went into a different direction. So rather than grade papers that were not done as was intended, I want you to resubmit them. Okay, so what we're going to do today, we're going to look today at databases. We'll see how to use them, and then I hope it will be easier for you to do the assignment for those that didn't get it. Okay. So comparative advantage. Last semester we talked about comparative advantage. What do you remember about comparative advantage? The La Liga Group is going to talk about it probably. Yes. Yes. It's יתרון יחסי in Hebrew.
We talked about
specialized in something, a country that is specialized in something.
The country specializes in something. And
we talked about Ricardo and Adam Smith. And,
we did. We talked about Ricardo, Adam Smith.
In this case, it's Ricardo. Like she said,
She's exporting product.
the country export, the country that has a comparative advantage is something. This country will export this product.
A country that has a comparative advantage. A country that has a comparative advantage will export those products that it specializes in. That's what you're saying? Okay, so we have specialization. Countries specialize in different fields. Countries specialize in different industries. They will export in what they specialize in. They'll import what they don't specialize in. What is missing in this equation is one more variable. Porter's diamond was developed in around 1990. Ricardo developed his theory about 200 years before that. He didn't hear about Porter. He didn't meet him. He never heard of Porter. Okay, so two different things. So, comparative advantage. What is missing here? So we have specialization, and what is missing? There's one more variable that we're not looking at. No, not outsourcing. It's much more basic when we talk about a business model. What do we need in order to succeed, in order to be profitable? Sorry? Knowledge, okay. But when we talk about profitability, we don't only talk about what we're good at, we also talk at sources and how efficient we are with our sources. In other words, it's not only about specialization, but it is also about maximizing our capabilities, or if you want, efficiency. At the end of the day, we specialize, but we export only those industries or those products from those industries in which we are more efficient than others. So it's not only about specializing, it's also about efficiency, and it's also about effectiveness. How do we make most of our money? And so the example I think I gave you last semester was this one, the cab driving student. Student who as a student worked as a cab driver at night, and he was really good at driving cabs, and at that time he made a lot of money. He knew exactly how to get fastest where. This was the period when Waze didn't exist yet. Okay? The guy becomes a very successful broker, makes lots and lots of money, then one day has to go to the airport. Can you close your computers, please, and focus, because you don't know the theory yet. So try to focus on what we're doing here in class. Focus on what we're doing here in class, please. Okay, so one day this really successful broker who used to be a taxi driver 10 years before takes a taxi to the airport. The taxi driver doesn't really speak English, doesn't really know the way. And so the broker at first gets really upset and says, I know the way much better than this stupid cab driver. I'm a much more efficient cab driver. I'm much better at what he does than he is. But then he realizes that as a broker, he's much more efficient than the cab driver can ever be. And that is really the idea of comparative advantage. So it's not only about specializing in a certain field, the broker specializing in being a broker, taxi driver specializing in being a taxi driver. It is also about what each of them does best with the capabilities they have. And so yes, it's something you will always tell yourself, for instance, when your cleaning lady doesn't clean your house like you would like to. The reason she's a cleaning lady and not a professor is because this is what she knows how to do. You're much better at being a professor. You make much more money at being a professor. So that is really the idea of comparative advantage. It's true at the individual level. It's true at the country level. So it's not only about what you specialize in, it is also what you do best and how you can make most money or how you can be most efficient. Okay. We talked about that. And so comparative advantage used to be the main explanation why countries trade. Different countries have different comparative advantages, and so they focus on those areas they're good at especially. Of course, this is something that changes over time. So, for instance, if we look at China, 10 years ago, China was focusing especially on the lower part of the value-added chain, relatively simple activities, relatively simple manufacturing processes. As time goes by, the Chinese get better educated. They learn how to do processes and focus on those areas they're good at especially. Of course, this is something that changes over time. The added chain, they are becoming better at more complex processes, and so the less complex processes are now moved to countries that have a lower knowledge base. So what you see in the world is that specializing in certain areas is not a static thing, but it actually moves. It's always a moving target. It all the time changes because countries specialize over time in new topics. 3 theories deal with this issue. One is product life cycle, which was developed by Vernon. One is a strategic trade model, and the third is Porter's diamond. All 3 models try to explain why countries or why comparative advantages of countries change over time, why this is a dynamic process and not a static process. Okay? So the first one, product life cycle. Product life cycle was developed by Vernon from Harvard University. And it talks about when countries engage in international trade, at which stages of the product life cycle. So basically, if you have your axis, your x-axis, which starts with a new product, this is the product life cycle, right? You know that cycle or not? Yes. It starts with an embryonic stage, where in the industry it's not really clear which product is going to be the leading product. Then usually one of the products or one of the technologies becomes the leading technology, and the industry enters growth stage, and then more competitors come into the industry. You have a lot of opportunity to grow, but also a lot of competition. Rules of the game are being established during the growth stage. Then you enter maturity. Usually maturity means that growth in the industry is less than 10%, and then at the end there is a stage of decline. Did you learn this model? Yes. You did? In marketing, yeah, about products. Did you learn it about industries? Did you get also the theory behind the product life cycle? No. Okay, so let's talk about it for a moment, because it's important you understand the concept. So it has a lot of strategic issues. Okay, so what we're going to do is the following. Okay. So usually when we talk about the industry life cycle, I prefer to talk about the industry life cycle rather than the product life cycle, because we'll have individual products within the industry. Okay, think smartphones. We're now on, I don't know which generation of smartphones, but smartphones are, of course, evolved over time. Still, the industry is the smartphone industry. Within that industry, you'll have specific product life cycles of different products, of different generations of products, but it's still the same industry. So there is a difference between product life cycle and industry life cycle, and I want to talk about industry life cycle. So if, for instance, we take the industry which is called the smartphone industry, okay? Smartphone industry. Started when? When did the smartphone industry start? Any ideas? 2002. Sorry? 2002. 8, 7? Okay. I was actually thinking about the cell phone industry. If you look at the cell phone industry, which started with... Okay. The question is, and that should be your first question.
What do you mean smartphone?
What do you mean by smartphone? Okay. So let's go back in time. Let's go back in time. When did the cell phone industry start? We're going to Google that. No, don't Google it. 1995. No Google. 2000. 1992. Okay, so I have some news for you. It started in the 1960s. Ooh. It started even before the מקרר הזה, before they had this huge... Okay, first of all, I would like to remind you that we are talking about an international industry. So you cannot refer only to your experiences in Israel. Not necessarily the industry develops... Not every country develops at the same rate. Okay, so basically the cell phone industry started in the 60s. It started in the 60s when in New York, for the first time, two people were able to talk to each other using cell phone technology. It took until the 80s before cell phones started to become a product that is used by the public. So it took about 20 years to take the product from its alpha stage, where you had proof of concept, to the stage where it could be marketed to the public. By the way, the first country to use cell phone technology was Finland. Finland was one of the first countries in the world to use cell phone technology, and the reason was prosaic. One of the reasons was that in Finland there was no infrastructure for regular phones, because the country is very, very big. Geographically, it's a huge country, very little populated, a few million people living in Finland. And so it was never really worthwhile for the local PTT or the local Basic, the local phone company, to put down infrastructure all through Finland. And so Finland didn't really have a good phone infrastructure. So they were, as a country, the country was looking for substitutes, and so they were very welcoming to the cell phone industry, as compared to most other Western countries that had very good infrastructures, such as Israel. Okay, in the 80s, nearly everyone had a phone at home, a phone at work, and so there was not so much need for a cell phone, but in Finland there was a lot of need. So Finland started, and by the way, Nokia was not established as a cell phone company. Nokia was actually a huge conglomerate, a Swedish conglomerate, as a Finnish conglomerate that was invested in energy, it was invested in rubber, it was invested in wood products, it was invested in all kinds of issues, and their CEO at the time saw that the cell phone industry may be a good engine of growth, and he decided to invest in cell phones as a trial while they were still working on rubber products. For instance, when in the 90s, I had tires on my car made by Nokia. Okay? They were exporting rubber products, such as tires for a car. So Nokia was actually not a cell phone company. And then during the 90s, they saw that this really is their most successful strategic business unit. And so they divested all their other activities and became a company that focuses on this technology. People, 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 close your computers. Believe me, WhatsApp will wait for you. Really, promise. Your emails will be there when we finish class, really. That is part of the technology. It's a great technology. If you don't look at it, it will wait for you. Okay. So basically, if we really ask ourselves, the smartphone industry is part of the cell phone industry. And so if we say, let's look at the cell phone industry, we start somewhere in the 60s. Okay? If we look at the smartphone industry, which is a part of this cell phone industry, we'll talk about something like the year 2000. Okay? Usually, at the beginning, when an industry starts, there is the technology. Having said that, usually we don't really know how that technology is going to serve us. We don't really understand what we can do with the technology, and you'll have different versions of the technology. You said BlackBerry. Okay, BlackBerry was, for instance, it was People in Motion. What was the company called? I don't remember, but the name of the company I forgot. We all remember, or most of you might remember, the brand itself, which was BlackBerry. BlackBerry is was a technology that at the end of the day did not become the dominant technology in smartphones. Okay? The dominant technology actually was the technology developed by Apple. So first of all, at the beginning, when the industry is in its embryonic stage, we will see different companies developing different technologies and trying to convince the market that their technology should become the leading technology. Usually, once the industry takes off, there will be only one leading technology, and only the companies that use that technology or market that technology will be the ones to survive. All the other companies that have invested in other technologies will usually disappear at the end of the embryonic period. So this is the period where basically, in a way, the industry is still sort of an incubator. There are options for different technologies. There are options for different companies. It is not really clear how we're going to use the technology because it has not yet developed and we don't really know how to use it. So we don't know what derivatives will be from that technology. There's really a lot of uncertainty, a lot of dynamism, which also creates a lot of opportunities. Because basically, you can decide how the world is going to be or how the world is going to look. Because you're the one who's trying to develop that technology. Okay, at the end of the embryonic period, usually we don't really have business models. We usually don't really have markets. We don't really have customers. It's all very fluid. But if the technology is effective enough, the industry at a certain point will start taking off. And as you understood with the cell phone industry, this might take 20 years. We're not necessarily talking about 2 or 3 years. No, it can take 20 years. If you look at the biopharma industry, okay, all these medicines, all the pharmacology that is based on more complex technologies. Technologies, for instance, there is this technology that will take the ingredient of a pharmaceutical and deliver it to the specific point in your body where it's needed. Okay? The vehicle exists. It really exists. It's sort of a nanotechnology. It exists. It has a proof of concept. But between the point where the technology exists, proof of concept exists, and the time it is really used by people, this can take 20 years. Clinical trials, FDA, whatever, it can take 20 years. Okay, so many times while we think that technology is developed very, very quickly, these processes, if you really look at where it starts and where it becomes a common product, it can take 10, 15, 20 years. It can also take less. It can also take 3 or 4 years. The smartphone industry, within the cell phone industry, the smartphone industry developed much quicker, but still started in 2000. We're at 2017 now. So we're talking about a gap of 17 years. Good morning. Okay, so once the embryonic period is over, we get into the growth stage of the industry. Meaning that the industry will grow at least 10% a year, but can also grow 50% a year. So if you consider that the industry is growing very quickly, you have to understand that this is really the period in the industry's life cycle where you can make a lot of money. Okay, industry is growing very, very fast. There is more demand than there is supply usually at this stage, meaning that if there is more demand than supply, what does that do to prices? Prices go up. Exactly. So you can ask a high price. What also happens during growth? What happens when we learn how to manufacture products? What happens? You remember you learned that somewhere?
Chain.
Manufacturing becomes cheaper because we learn how to do it, right? So in growth stage, you have a very interesting phenomenon. On one hand, okay, this is the learning curve. The learning curve means that this is volume. Learning curve talks about reduction in cost, the higher the volume of your manufacturing. So the more you manufacture, the lower your cost per product. Okay, and as you can see at the beginning, it's reduced very quickly. Okay, so if we're a new company, we start here. If we are able to manufacture high enough volume, our cost will be reduced very, very quickly. Okay, so this is cost. But as we said before, prices at this same stage, because usually demand outreaches supply, what happens to the price is something like this. Okay? So this is what happens at the growth stage. Prices either stay the same or may even go up a little bit because of demand, while costs are reduced very quickly. So what we have here, what is this called? Exactly, this is called profit. It's כמות מצטברת. Okay, so this is called profit. So what should be clear to you, that at the growth stage, this is the time the companies in an industry make a lot of profit because of these two processes. But of course, when industries start making profit, not only individual companies, but whole industries start to become very profitable, what happens usually are two phenomena. One, a lot of new entrants, because other companies and other people, other entrepreneurs see what is happening and they say, hey, we want to be part of that bonanza. We can also sell smartphones, and that's exactly what happened in the smartphone industry, right? At the beginning, basically we had two major suppliers of smartphones, Apple and Samsung. Okay? At this point in the life cycle, you have tens, if not hundreds, of manufacturers of smartphones, right? A lot of them don't come to Israel, so you don't really know their names. But Huawei as a Chinese company, and what is it called? HTC, I think, and Xiaomi, LG, Huawei. We already said Huawei. So what happens at the growth stage is that you can make very big profits, but it's a temporary situation because it's so profitable. So everyone wants to be part of that game. Everyone wants to enter the industry. Plus the companies that are already in the industry are trying to grow as fast as possible to capture as much market share as possible. So basically everyone is growing. By the way, if you're really looking to become a senior manager very, very quickly, find a job in an industry that is in its beginning of the growth stage, because companies in this stage grow very, very quickly. And so if you're one of the first people to work in that company, within a year or 2 years, you'll become senior management because they're all the time hiring and hiring and hiring just to continue growing. So if you really want to become a senior manager quickly, look for an industry that is somewhere in this part of the growth stage, and I guarantee you if you do good enough work, you will become a senior manager within 1 or 2 years. Okay? So that is also part of the equation. A lot of opportunities, personal opportunities, organizational opportunities, opportunities to catch market share, opportunities to become the leading business model, opportunities to become the leading technology, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this stage is a very, very attractive stage in the industry life cycle. in this stage also, companies start to export. This is a stage, especially at the later part of this growth stage, companies start to export because, for instance, the technology comes from Israel. It is not, the knowledge is not yet disseminated all over the world. It still is or a monopoly or semi-monopoly of knowledge, and so it's worthwhile to export it because you can make a high profit. What happens at a certain point? Demand and supply meet. You remember that from your courses in economics. Demand and supply meet, and what happens when demand and supply meet? What happens to prices? The prices are lowered. So if we go back to our very crude little diagram and we change, oh, okay, doesn't matter, change, this can also be time, then what happens at the end of the growth stage is that basically there will be a excess of capacity. All the companies in the industry will find that there is not much growth going on anymore, and they're basically not able to get to their targets, to their sales targets. Okay, because the sales targets are always based on previous experience. And usually companies will assume that what was is what will be. So what happens to the price is that there is less demand in the industry. Companies cannot reach their sales targets, and they make a lot of profit. So the easiest way to deal with that, and the fastest way to deal with that, is to lower your prices. Okay?
But it doesn't stay.
Until what stage do you think the prices will be lowered? Is there a problem? Is there a problem? No. So until what level will prices be lowered?
There will be no profit.
Manufacture, a little above the manufacturing cost, which we call cost plus. Okay? Up until this point, pricing was not based on how much it costs to manufacture. Pricing up until this point was based on perceived value. Okay, up until this point, prices were based on perceived value. How much do our customers want to pay for our product? How much is it worth to them? Yes. Well, the measure, usually we look at how quickly the industry grows per year. If it grows faster than 10% per year, over a number of years, it's a growing industry.
Is there a good example for something that's been going on in the past few years?
Startups.
No, startups is not an industry. No. Industries are always defined according to a technology or according to a product. So communication is not an industry, it's a sector which includes a lot of different industries.
Electric cars.
Sorry?
Electric cars.
Self-driving cars. I think self-driving cars at this point in time is in its embryonic stage. There are different models of and different technologies of self-driving cars. There are different technologies that serve this industry of self-driving cars. There is no dominant technology yet. There is not one company or one technology we can say is much better than the others. But it will happen at a certain point. At a certain point, we'll see that one of the technologies, maybe Google's technology, maybe another technology, will be the major technology. And then suddenly we'll see that the industry will get into the growth stage. Okay? Okay, so while in a growth industry, pricing is based on perceived value, in a maturing industry, pricing is based on cost plus, meaning that it costs us $100 to manufacture. we want to earn another 10%, so our pricing is $110. Okay, while it may have been $500 during growth stage. So then we have, this is the mature stage of the industry life cycle, meaning that growth is somewhere between 0 and 10%. There is growth, but growth is usually one-digit growth, it's slow growth. The industry is not dynamic anymore, it's not really exciting anymore. Everyone knows how to behave in the industry. Usually there is just one business model that everyone uses, everyone competes in the same way, on the same basis. And this can go on for quite a long time. If you think about all kinds of consumer goods, for years they're in their mature industry. Think refrigerators, think washing machines, think retail of food. All those industries are in their mature stage. So, meaning usually it's an oligopoly, meaning that we have a few big competitors, a lot of small competitors that focus on specific niches. The game is well known, behavior is well known, pricing is well known. There is not much to go around, and the game is more or less known. So that is the mature stage, and then at a certain point, behavior changes or technology changes, something happens that basically starts to cause decline, and decline means that growth becomes negative. So there is no growth anymore in the industry. The industry starts to become smaller. It's yeah, and it has another word. It's shrinking. Okay, shrinking is not a bad word. Okay, and what we see usually at the same time is that a new industry is developing and will be in its embryonic stage. Okay, so that is the idea of the life cycle theory, industry life cycle theory. It's one of the well-known theories that we use to explain how industries work, and also to explain how to create business strategies for different stages of the industry life cycle. Okay, so if we relate that to international trade, then basically export is done by countries that innovate. So smartphones were developed in the United States. The United States was one of the first countries to export smartphones during the stage that the technology was innovative. And so now that you understand the model, basically what you can see is that once the industry gets into its growth stage in the source country, it will start exporting that technology. But as said, the more mature the industry becomes, the more competitors enter the game, the less value basically is created for export markets. And so as you can see during the mature stage, what happens is that products that used to be exported actually become products that are imported. Okay, so as said, during the growth stage, the United States exported smartphones, especially Apple smartphones. Now that the industry is maturing, it's actually, as a country, importing smartphones from countries such as China, Korea, Hong Kong, and so on and so forth. Okay, so once the knowledge becomes disseminated, once the knowledge becomes common knowledge, we see that countries cannot continue specializing in that technology, and they basically have to innovate in other technologies, okay? So what we're seeing is that import and export, that trade is a dynamic process. It's a dynamic process because of the industry life cycle. So that also means that a country like Israel that bases a lot of its wealth on knowledge and on innovation, the country as a country has to innovate continuously in order to remain wealthy. You cannot base yourself on something that was developed 10 years ago, because by now it will have become common knowledge and will already be manufactured in countries that are more efficient in manufacturing processes. So basically when we talk about a comparative advantage, we talk about having to run faster than anyone else all the time. And again, I would like to tell you, which maybe is not nice to hear, not pleasant to hear, but this is true also at the individual level. If you want to be attractive to the industry where you're going to work at in another 30 years, so when you're about 60, and at that time you still will need to make money because otherwise you will be poor when you're old. In order to be attractive to the industry in another 30 years, it means you will have to continue investing in your own knowledge base for the next 30 years. Because if you don't invest in your own knowledge base for the next 30 years, you will not be attractive anymore. Your comparative advantage will erode, it will disappear. Okay, so that is also part of what I hope you'll take away from this. Okay. So we talked about that. Then there is strategic trade theory. Basically, strategic trade theory talks about the fact that full competition or open competition doesn't really work. At the end of the day, if countries want to be competitive, they have to protect especially their developing industries. Because if they don't protect their developing industries, other countries will copy it too quickly before they can get their ROI, their return on investment. And so basically what we see is that countries, even those countries such as Israel that encourage free trade, they will protect certain industries that they believe are pertinent or important to the wealth of the country over time. And that brings us to Porter's diamond, which you have already studied last semester. The whole idea behind Porter's diamond is basically that comparative advantages are not only the result of factor endowment, of what a country has, I would say, as basic conditions, but Porter's diamond is really about the fact that countries can create new competitive advantages. So it's not only companies. We have a lot of literature about companies creating competitive advantages and comparative advantages. But basically, the whole idea of Porter's diamond is that as a country, you can decide, government can decide that a country will specialize in certain industries and encourage the development of those industries in all kinds of ways. And when we'll talk about Israel as an example, we'll see how that works. Okay? So basically, the idea behind Porter's diamond is that factor endowments is part of the equation, but then there is all the other aspects that a country can develop. And again, you can take that to a very personal level. As you may know or may not know, there are certain factor endowments at the individual level that will help us to be more popular. For instance, people who have white skins are more popular than people who have dark skins. Okay, we look different. At the world level, we look different at people who are white, blonde, and people who are not white and not blonde. Taller people are more popular than smaller people. People who have very symmetrical faces are considered more beautiful than people who have asymmetrical faces. That is how we are as people. That is how we judge. Okay, so these are your factor endowments. They will help you when you go for your first interview. They will help you to create a first impression. But then the question is, what happens after that? Do you have the knowledge? Do you have the experience? Do you have verbal abilities? Do you have other abilities? At the end of the day, factor endowment is nice to have. It's always nice to be young, beautiful, blonde, tall, whatever. It's a nice factor endowment to have. Is it sufficient to get the job? Usually not. Okay, especially when we talk about more sophisticated jobs, more sophisticated, more knowledgeable type of jobs. So the same goes for countries. Countries have factor endowments. Some countries are smaller, some countries are larger, some countries have a lot of natural resources, some countries don't have natural resources. We know that in Israel we have relatively very few natural resources. Doesn't mean we cannot be competitive on an international level. It just means that we have to invest more in industries, in firms, in demand conditions, and in supporting industries. That's all what it takes, okay? So that's the idea behind Porter's diamond. Now, competitiveness of a country basically means that a country is able to create more wealth for its citizens. So it's a lot about wealth creation for the citizens and creating an environment that allows sustainable competitiveness. What influences the ability of a country to create wealth? Well, it's science, education, and innovation. It's economic soundness, political soundness, it's finance, and it's internationalization. The more internationalized a country, the more wealthy. There's a very high correlation between internationalization and wealth. Together, these factors and the political, social, legal, and cultural environment, together they create the basis for the country's competitiveness. It's productivity and growth. That also is one of the reasons why you should always vote during elections, because the political system at the end of the day influences countries' wealth at a very high level. Okay, so we'll not go over that. As said, part of you handed in a good assignment, good answer to the assignment. Part of you really missed it. You really didn't get what you should have done at the assignment. And so I want to talk about the World Economic Forum report. And I want you to work with it a bit because, as said, about half of the class really didn't get the report. Okay. The idea of the assignment was that you find the report and look at it. So one way to look at global competitiveness is using the World Economic Forum report. It's a yearly report. Every year they rank all the countries in the world based on economic soundness. This is how the report looks. And we'll have a look at it in a moment, but I want first, let's have a look. I don't know why it's not. No.
second page.
No, I'm looking for them. And it has a link. I don't know. I lost the link somehow in my presentation.
It's download.
Yeah, I'm not looking to download. I have the report, but I'm looking for the. It has a short presentation. Regional agenda. Okay. Well, of course, I cannot find it now. Okay, so let's. We'll look at this later. But basically, the report the report exists of two parts. The first part is a basic overview of how the world looks and what issues the world is dealing with at the current year, the year that the report is written in. Then the second part of the report is about countries. Okay, and so basically they have, for each country, they have a specific report and ranking. Now, World Economic Forum looks at 12 pillars. They call them pillars, 12 variables. And each of those 12 variables is made up of a whole group of smaller variables. The 12 pillars that are looked at in the World Economic Forum Competitiveness Report are basic requirements, which has 4 pillars: institutions, infrastructure, macroeconomic environment, and health and primary education. This is considered basic requirements, or maybe, if you want, factor conditions. So this is the basic factors that characterizes a country. Then you'll have efficiency enhancers. What makes a country more efficient? These are the following pillars: higher education, market efficiency, labor market efficiency, financial market development, technological readiness, and market size. And then the third group of pillars is business sophistication and innovation. And then countries are ranked on all those pillars or all those variables, and that gives them a overall ranking. So you can see, if you take Israel, Israel is ranked 24th out of 138 countries that were ranked in 2016-17. Okay? And so we have here the basic data about Israel: its size, the population, GDP, GDP per capita, and GDP, PPP as percentage of world GDP. So overall, we're ranked not bad at all, 24th in the world, meaning that Israel is not doing bad at all. But if we go down on the different pillars or the different variables, we can see that actually its performance is not equal over all variables. So, for instance, if we look at the macroeconomic environment, we are ranked number 48 in the world. We're not doing that well in macroeconomic terms. However, if we look at innovation, okay, in innovation, we're ranked number 2 in the world. So we're among the most innovative countries in the world. Okay, overall, we're ranked 8th in innovation and sophistication. Okay, so basically, as you can see, it gives an insight into what makes a country more competitive or less competitive. And then the report also will give you information about the most problematic factors for doing business in Israel and each country. So in Israel, the most problematic factors for doing business, which will not come as a big surprise maybe to you, is inefficient government bureaucracy, tax rates, and policy instability. These are considered the most problematic factors of doing business in Israel. As you can see, we're also doing well on other variables. You can see public health, for instance. We actually do very well on public health. On inflation, we do well. So there are variables we're actually doing well on, but also it will give you the most problematic factors for doing business. Sorry. And then you can get, if you go down the report, you can actually get exactly each variable that interests you. Okay, we'll talk about Michael Porter's report afterwards. Now, what you can do, if you go into the internet site of the World Economic Forum, and you go to reports, and you go to the next. You go to, okay, this is what I was looking for, by the way. Yeah.
With the global economy still in recovery, countries must embrace openness, technology, and innovation to remain competitive. But how do you measure competitiveness? The Global Competitiveness Report identifies 12 key pillars: institutions, infrastructure, macroeconomic environment, health and primary education, higher education and training, goods market efficiency, labor market efficiency, financial market development, technological readiness, market size, business sophistication, and innovation. Switzerland comes in first. Singapore comes in second, topping the higher education and training pillar. The United States remains third, driven by business sophistication and innovation, but lagging on basic factors such as infrastructure and public finances. The Netherlands rises by 1 place. Germany follows in 5th position. Sweden reaches 6th place with improvements in business sophistication and innovation. The United Kingdom is in 7th position. Japan falls to 8th position, showing a deterioration in its capacity to innovate. Hong Kong is 9th overall, with the highest marks on infrastructure. Finland is 10th, with the best score on institutions and health and primary education. Against the background of low productivity and economic growth in both emerging and advanced economies, this year's report reaches 3 key conclusions. Monetary stimulus is not enough. In economies without strong competitive conditions, efforts to revitalize growth through monetary policy alone would be less effective, failing to reignite growth. To stimulate business and entrepreneurship, countries must adopt comprehensive competitiveness agendas. Technology and innovation are increasingly driving development. By merging physical, biological, and digital systems, the 4th Industrial Revolution is bringing unprecedented change to the nature of work and productivity. In this context, the Global Competitiveness Report shows that technology and innovation are playing an increasingly important role relative to other factors in driving competitiveness and growth. Declining openness is putting future growth and prosperity at risk. Openness to trade and foreign investment generates incentives for businesses to innovate. To safeguard these environments against the rise of protectionism, inclusive growth strategies are a top priority. We hope that the Global Competitiveness Report will serve as a tool for policymakers, businesses, and civil society to collaborate on the development of a shared vision of economic progress and prosperity.
Okay, so what you can do, you can download it, of course, the report, but you can also go into the report reader and then into data, and you can select an economy. And then if you want, you can also select an index component. And then you basically get the country report, okay, per country. So you don't need to download it necessarily. You can also compare it to another country. You also
Hub Media.